There we go. Recording has been enabled. So thanks again to everybody who has joined the call today. We have near and dear friend to my heart since she is my co-PI on the EPIC project, but today she gets to talk about one of her other many hats. Jen is going to be talking all about NetSage, and I will turn it over to you, Jen.
Thank you, Jason. I'm going to share my screen. Right, so we're good with the screen sharing because I know that's been wonky as well.
Looks good.
Thank you. All right, so as Jason mentioned, I'm going to be talking about NetSage today, and I'm going to flip back and forth between slides and semi-live demonstrations of NetSage. Everything I'm going to show you today is publicly available. So, and I've put URLs in to the slides of the pages that I'm going to at least start with to go from. So you can play with this around on your own. Part of what we really like about NetSage is the data is available publicly, and you can, all of the dashboards I'm going to show you, you can put in your own institution, you can do your own lookups and such. Right, so I'm going to give a high-level overview, talk about, walk through a couple examples. So for those of you who haven't heard of NetSage yet, it's been around about 4 or 5 years now. It's a measurement and monitoring service for research and education networks, primarily. It's primarily used to understand current traffic patterns across the instrumented circuits, to identify large sources or sinks, to figure out what are the patterns of behaviors of data transfers from my institution or my project. It's a collaboration between Indiana University, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and the University of Hawaii at Manoa. So Jason Lee is the co-PI there, and Andy Lake at LBL is the co-PI at LBL. And it was originally funded through the international program, the International Networks Program, IRNC. However, I'm mostly going to be talking about our domestic deployment, which is supported via EPIC. So the use cases that we've focused on are, I've listed them here. One of the things we've done with NetSage is every dashboard answers a question. This has helped us keep it focused, so we know what data should or shouldn't be on that dashboard, and it's also kind of helped guide how we've done our development. We are constantly asking, what are the questions that people are asking of the data? What do you want to see next? What are you trying to puzzle out of this? So I'm going to walk through a bunch of these. But we're looking at how are the links used and what are the congestion points, who are the top sources and destinations, who's using my archive, what are the flows like between organizations and such. Okay. Every measurement and monitoring tool is only as good as the data included in it. So we use SNMP data, which is passive. This is your basic bandwidth data. It's shared pretty broadly. We use active monitoring through perf sonar measurements. I'm actually not going to talk about that piece pretty much at all today. But we also collect flow data. It gets de-identified before it gets put into the NetSage archive. We have a similar tool to collect flow-like data from archives called TSTAT. This gives us TCP flow statistics. We've got this deployed in a number of places, TAC, NOAA, NCAR, NERSC. This is also de-identified before it's stored. And by de-identified, I mean we wipe off the low order bits. So we never have a full IP address in the NetSage archive. This is one of the ways that we have a pretty strict privacy agreement. One of the things we've done in the last year since I've last given an update to this group is we've adapted how we're doing our flow data collection to allow people to have it completely on their own site. What we used to do, and what we still do for some of the data sources, is flow data gets redirected to a collection point. A pipeline is run there, which includes the de-identification, and then it gets sent to a NetSage archive. We had previously set up an IU collection point that's actually in a different room than the NetSage archive. However, we now have a Docker version of this, which can run on a container at your institution. Linux or Mac OS, sorry about the typo. You can redirect your router, point to that collection service, and then it goes from there. The only issue we have is that means that you are now responsible for running that software and keeping it up to date. So we have to let people know when the pipeline gets updated. It's very straightforward. We've had a lot of luck deploying this. And Great Plains Network was our guinea pig for this, so I'm going to use them as my example for a bunch of this. Thank you, James Deaton. I mentioned NetSage started by monitoring the international networks that are funded from NSF. NSF was trying to treat their research and education networks more like a facility. Unlike a high performance computer or a data resource, you don't have to have an account to use a network. So it turns out it can be very challenging to know who's using the network and how. So that's why NetSage was started, so that NSF could look at its multi-million-dollar investment in R&D networks and figure out what's going on. For the Iron Sea project, we've got collection points in New York, Miami, Seattle, Honolulu, and Guam. One of the things we've done in the last 2 years as part of the EPIC project, joint with Jason, is we've expanded to have domestic deployments. EPIC has 6 domestic partners. 4 of them currently have NetSage deployments. Great Plains Network, which is what I'm really going to walk through today, iLight and the Indiana Gigapop, Kimber, Penryn, and the Front Range Gigapop. We also are collecting data from TAC, NCAR, and NERSC is listed here. TAC, we'd had an archive set up with them for about 3 years now. We've just started collecting some of their network data as well. Because we have all of these different deployments, each of them has their own starting point. And if you start there, all of the pages you go from there are going to be scoped to their own data. We now have this all.netsage.global dashboard as well, which has all of the data we have from everybody. I will warn you, if you do long time sets for the all page, the tool currently will barf because it runs out of resources. It's a lot of data. So we try to scope that down. So I'm going to try out a few things for those of you who haven't seen this before. I have 2 different pages here. That is the wrong one. Give me the other one. All right. So some of you have seen me do this for the international links. We're doing this for the Great Plains Network today. So this is what their basic network looks like. This is using SNMP data. I can hover over any of these links and see what the performance of that link is. I have data for each of the links down here. This shows you just the basic SNMP data plus the volume in and out, okay? And then at the very bottom, we have the graph that all network people love and all visualization people hate, which is the everything related to this network graph over time. The default for this page is 24 hours. All of the NetSage pages have a similar setup. In this top corner, they'll have a pull-down menu, this spinning S, which gives you the different questions you can answer. In the top corner on the other side has the time frame. We've done various defaults. Most of the flow data defaults to 7 days. Most of the bandwidth data like this is either 24 hours or a month, depending on how we're going to visualize it. You can put in a time frame like the last 90 days, or you can put in an absolute time frame. If you put in an absolute time frame, one of the nice things is it will create a URL that is specific to this page. So you can share that URL with anyone else and they will see exactly the same page that you're showing them. I mentioned, sometimes we look at 30-day data. This is the same SNMP data, only as a heat map. So this is the last 30 days for each of those networks. So you start to see how this tool can be used to see these patterns. You know, in the map form, some groups use that map to make sure their load balancing is going well. So for example, we've also got a deployment for a big US-Europe collaboration called the Advanced North Atlantic Collaboration. They've got 9 or 10 links that span the Atlantic, and you can see the load balancing pretty good from that page. For a lot of these links, we can see the normal stride that we would expect for a week, right? So the lighter color on the weekend, this is a 3-day weekend. This was Labor Day, September 7th. And occasionally we see something else. So as I was prepping for this talk, I noticed that Oklahoma had this big burst over 2 weeks. And my first thought was, oh, maybe that's when their classes started. Because we see that often. You'll have you know, the darker color means more data, more volume. So maybe that was what was going on. Turns out, no, in this case, because I went and talked to James about this, it turns out that one of the backup links for some of the Oklahoma traffic went down, and all of the traffic shifted over to this link seamlessly. And actually, it stayed there for a while because it was performing so well, nobody really noticed, and it wasn't an urgent thing that had to get corrected. So that's one way this kind of data is used. If I had, so going back here, right, I can pick anything, you know, the bandwidth patterns is right here. That's what we just looked at. One of the things a lot of people like to do is look at the top sources and destinations for the flows over a network. So because the dashboards are lazy load, I've actually prepped these ahead of time. I'm sharing a house network with a 14-year-old and a partner, and it can never do a live demo, right? Oh, I guess I should have also warned people that my dogs occasionally howl at sirens, and we live 3 blocks off campus, so there's lots of sirens. So apologies in advance if that happens. Right, so we're looking at the top sources and destinations for flow data for the Great Plains network, okay? And the top sources are what you'd expect by volume and by rate. Same thing for destinations. When we scroll down, we see the top pairs. Often this is a really useful view because you can see, for example, University of Nebraska to California, 194 terabytes of data in the last 7 days. And again, you can change this time frame to whatever you'd like. When I was playing around with this, I zoomed in, I was looking at this University of Oklahoma, Texas, because I thought that was interesting. I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. So the other thing that we've got on here are a few other ways to visualize the data. So for example, we have this line chart, which can show you, for example, University of Nebraska is serving data to a lot of different sites. That's pretty cool to see, right? But it's also receiving data from a number of different sites. However, when you play with these dashboards and you get more familiar with the data, you see things that are interesting. So source, destination. University of Nebraska is serving data, almost 20 terabytes of data to Renatir. That's the country network, the national REN for France. This is probably higher geophysics data. I've looked into it a little bit more from the other tools that we have. We'll look at it in the higher geophysics dashboard as well. I would think Renatir should be getting this data directly from CERN. JISC is a similar setup for the UK. Similarly, I would think they should be perhaps getting this data from CERN directly. I'm not sure why it's set up this way. It's possible Nebraska-Lincoln is actually doing some additional work on the data archives that get pulled down for the LHC experiments they're working on. But this is just one of the things that comes out when you have these different visualizations. So NetSage can show you these patterns and patterns of behaviors and time frames so that you can then look into it in more detail. So I mentioned up here, I had been looking at this University of Oklahoma TAC page. So if I clicked on University of Oklahoma, what would pull up is this page, flow data by organization for University of Oklahoma. I could also navigate to this over here. So the flows by organization, okay? So this shows me the top flows sent by University of Oklahoma. And here I've got that one that I was interested in at UT Austin. It's almost 8 terabytes of data, okay? This page, again, shows you flows in both directions. So it was 8 terabytes out, but almost 49 terabytes in. Well, that's kind of interesting. I wonder if there's more going on with that, right? So I can look down here and see ports and other things. But if I clicked on University of Texas, Austin, right? What it would do is I'd pull up an individual flows page for the same time frame as that one, which shows me the flows over that time frame between University of Oklahoma and UT Austin. Now I've changed the time frame on this one because I was playing with it more and I wanted to see the last 90 days. Often that gives you a better sense of the patterns of large-scale data transfers, which is what we're trying to do here, right? So over the last 3 months, there have been almost 900 flows, 20 terabytes in one direction. This is a heat map. So it's kind of scattered all over, but there's kind of more stuff happening in the last 3 days. That's kind of interesting. I wonder what's going on with that. Maybe that's a group I should reach out to make sure they're well supported. Going the other way, 275 terabytes of data. Okay, I should definitely make sure that they're doing okay. They're not even getting a gig behavior though, a gig of data transfer rates. So 2.5 terabytes took somebody over almost 7 hours to transfer. We give you the subnet. So with this data, a network engineer can go into their own logs and figure out, maybe I need to look at this. Maybe this is someone I should be trying to support better since they're moving this much data, right? The interesting thing is that pattern where we saw the heavier flows in the last 3 days going out of Oklahoma, we're not seeing it coming in. Coming in, it's pretty regular. Right. Let me scroll down and see if there's anything else I wanted to see here. No. This bottom bit, this shows me which sensor is giving me this data from, which for some networks is really helpful and really needed. All right. So I'm walking through these various bits and pieces. Come on. I've shown you these other bits. If you want to play with these on your own, you can. I've included the URLs here, or you can start with gpn.netsage.global, try it on your own. I'll ask you to wait like 10 minutes till we get through this so we're not fighting over the database. One of the things we've done is we've added some analysis work. We wanted to, one of the questions we often got was, looking at the SNMP data, there was often a weird spike. Like, well, what does that spike mean? What's going on with that? So what we did, pull up, nope, that's the old one. Pull up my other page, right? So I can start back here and where this is, it's way on the bottom because this page is not as user-friendly. It's got more data to it and it's a little bit harder to explain to a non-cyber infrastructure engineering type, but we found this really useful. So pull this up. For Great Plains Network, we just look at all of the data, all of the SNMP data available. For other networks, you might want to look at a particular SNMP sensor and the particular flow sensor, because that's what we're doing is we're correlating a time frame for the SNMP work to what's happening looking at the flow data. So for example, I can zoom in on these spikes. That's kind of a different thing that's going on there. And it changes the time frame. So I've got a couple different things I can choose from. It changes the time frame. And what it also changes, stop, don't do that. Come on. It also changes the flow data information I have farther down the page. So both the listing of pairs, the top sources, and the top destinations, okay? So, and then it also changes, so it shows me all of this flow data, but the time range is shifted to match the time range that I've selected up here with my SNMP. So for example, maybe I just want to look at what is this guy, right? Which probably is just, let's look at what's that, okay? And I can scroll down. Most likely, it's University of Nebraska again, sharing data with University of California, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Different things will come up in different ways. One of the ways we used NetSage early on was Transpac, our link between the US and Asia, would have these strange spikes about every 8, 9, 10 days. And they started out of nowhere, 1 month. We looked at the flow data. We're like, wow, that's really weird. And we wanted to figure out what was causing it. It took one of my engineers about 2 weeks to actually dive down and figure this out. It turned out there was a new telescope experiment that had started up. They were sharing data between Italy and Japan over our link, and they were doing downloads about every 9, 10 days. So that's in part where this dashboard came from, is that was a use case that was identified. We wanted to figure out, can we make this easier for people to do? Now it's a click of a button. Right. So that's one of the bits that we've just added in that we have been used quite often by folks. So at this point, I'd normally ask for questions because we're kind of going to shift modes here. But with Zoom, this is really hard to do. So I'm just going to continue on.
Well, I have a question if you don't mind entertaining mine.
No, go for it.
So James and I are arguing, as is our typical pattern.
Really?
What was the port that you were seeing from that Nebraska transfer?
Well, we can look that up. Sorry, come on, this one. What was the port? No, I don't know that we've got the port on this page.
I thought I saw it at one point. It looked like port 22, so I was going to say that looks like a regular rsync over SSH job, but James in chat seems to think that it was stash cache. I don't know what port stash cache runs over, and I don't think guard is on, but somebody would probably know.
One of the challenges we have right now is answering just that question. So we can narrow it down to some things, but for example, because we developed this for not the Jason Jarosky level engineer, we needed to minimize the amount of information we were displaying. We've actually, in our next release, we're going to roll out a version of this dashboard that has what we've been referring to as the everything table, where for every flow, all of the data that we have for that flow will be in one place in one table. It won't fit on a single screen. There's just too much data there, but you'd be able to see for a specific flow, what is, what is the port and what's going on there. Oh, this is interesting. You've actually got IPv6 traffic too, James. Good for you. All right.
Yep, I think that's good for now. So you can go back.
Okay. So when NetSage started, there had been another project called Gloria that had a really lovely mapping of science projects. And we wanted to incorporate that data into NetSage as well. Turned out that data had been gathered in ways that we couldn't verify the licensing. So we had to start out from scratch, and we created the NetSage Science Registry. It's a tool that we use to understand what the flows are associated with in terms of projects and such. Because I've been looking at this data for 5 years on a bunch of different networks. I kind of have a feel for what some things are. Obviously, Jason does as well. But wouldn't it be great if you could actually just see, oh, these are all flows associated with Atlas, or these are all flows associated with this particular biology project. So that's one of the pieces that we're trying to do. We currently have about 450 entries, and an entry is a set of IP addresses that maps to a project and a science discipline, including the NSF science disciplines. So what that looks like. So the default that we come up with, high-energy physics.
So Jen, just a quick FYI, the screen sharing, I think, died on your end.
That's not good. Thank you. Hang on, did you know if you click on the Zoom icon on the bottom of your screen and you didn't start, you don't get to pull up the right window? All right, let's go here. So high-energy physics traffic still drives a lot of R&E traffic. So that's our default for this page. This shows of the 2 petabytes of data currently that Great Plains has collected over the last 7 days, transferred over the last 7 days. We match about a third of it. That's actually a pretty good hit rate. We're working with James to add detail to that. He's given us another bunch of IP addresses to map to it, in part because NetSage never has the full IP, right? We're reliant on other groups to give us that data. So we visualize this data in a couple different ways. This is a map of the data flows for high-energy physics. And actually you can turn on an animation and little arrows move that show you, the speed is reflective of the volume of transfer. It's really fabulous. We're not going to do it in a live meeting right now while I'm sharing network with my household on a now Friday after school afternoon. But if you hover over it, you can actually get data. So for example, we saw a lot of those flows out of University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Here's some additional data, right? Here is also University of Oklahoma. Again, these are great, right? We have also what's called a Sankey graph. This is another way of visualizing this data. So one of the things we've tried to do with NetSage, because we've got this great group, Jason Lee's group in Hawaii, that plays with a whole bunch of different visualization forms that I would never come up with. His students have been trying out different ways of viewing the data to get us, every viewpoint gives you a slightly different story, right? So with a Sankey graph, it basically shows you the flow through. The choke point for this is the discipline. If we had selected multiple disciplines at the top, it would show us how things are going for multiple disciplines. But I wanted to show you, remember we had talked about this run-a-tier traffic before. Here it is going from Nebraska-Lincoln over to France or over to the UK. Okay, so that's kind of cool. So we see it there. On the bottom of this, we have data about all of the different disciplines that we collect. These are the NSF disciplines plus a couple to work in our space. The second way, we're just starting to use the NetSage Science Registry data is in this new page, which is flow data for projects. Right now, we have a limited number of projects that are tagged. And actually, everything that's tagged Alice is actually Atlas because someone misunderstood my accent. So for the Great Plains Network data, I have my list of projects here. I picked Alice, and it will give me the list of endpoints for that, right? It'll also give me this heat map, which again is kind of interesting to see, for example, project life cycles. You can often see different mirrors or different patterns of behavior, okay? And we're collecting it from both endpoints, which we expected. It gives me a summary of the source and a summary of the destination organizations for that project. So we're still trying to figure out the best way to use this page. Often we'll put a page out as a prototype. It might not have enough data to really be used more broadly, but as we figure out how people want to use the dashboard, we also increase the data that we're collecting. So for example, for the current 450 entries, only about a 10th of them had a project initially assigned to it. We've just gone through and assigned projects or best estimated projects for all of the rest. And that update is going to happen over the next 6 weeks. So that's kind of a cool thing. Right. So this is kind of an in-progress deal. Let me go back to my slides now. Go back to my slides. Am I still screen sharing?
Nope, it died again.
It didn't used to die like that. Now?
Yep, you're good now.
That's weird. All right. So we walked through Science Registry. To add data to the Science Registry, it's really straightforward. We can send you a simple Excel spreadsheet with a number of columns. The only thing that's required is an IP range, the name of a project, and a science discipline. If you've got additional data for this, we can collect it as well. So for example, if you have a description, there's actually a website set up that also pulls this data into a human readable format, geolocation data and other things. We can propagate that, but it's not required. The only thing that's required is this IP address or a range mapped to a project name and a science discipline. So this is something it's crowdsourced. There is no way to gather this data in any automatic or online way. And it's not something that the NetSage staff has access to because we never have the full IP address. So if you're interested in using this for one of your projects, please let us know. The other way that we're working to have more specific data about organizations and the flows is we started using Swift to get better organizational details. So for example, a number of larger regionals share their IP space with the universities underneath them. So for example, Anderson University gets their IP space from iLight. So if I want to try to find Anderson University, it's not going to come up on the iLight page because it gets merged in with iLight. Internationally, the way that you see this is you have entire countries where the regional network has all of the IP space for all of the universities in that country. So for example, in Uganda, 90% of the traffic gets labeled RENU, which is their national network. However, we can now use SWIP to specify secondary organizations. We've done this, for example, with the Front Range Gigapop. UCAR maps a portion of their IP space to AHEC. This is a different AHEC. This is not the Indian AHEC. This is actually a different organization. So if you look it up in the max IP lookup, it is mapped to UCAR. But if you look at the WHOIS SWIP lookup, here you see that, I'm not even going to pronounce this, Aurora Higher Education Center, AHEC. So what that means is that in my flow data for organization, they show up as one of the groups here. I can type their name in and see what's going on. I actually looked up what Island Internet Solutions Corporation was, and it turns out it's a really large cloud provider in that region. So that is swamping their traffic by far, working with that one cloud provider. This is a fairly small institution, so not fully surprising. Right. So, so that is my real life example for this. And see there, it didn't stop sharing. All right. So NetSage is continuing to do development. The global NOC is now supporting some NetSage installations as a managed service, but the core NetSage team is still doing additional development and additional dashboards. One of the dashboards we've been working on is a dashboard so I can say, for my institution or my network, can you show me data transfers over this size that are getting performance under this? So who are the people trying to transfer really big data, but getting really crummy performance? Okay. Seems like the kind of question you'd want to ask. We look for these all the time. It's a little bit hard right now. So we've got a dashboard that will be deployed in the next 6-8 weeks to show that. We also have some dashboards that we're able to do data roll-ups so we can do longer term investigations. So for example, how have my top talkers changed over the last 2 years? For the networks that I oversee, a lot of the top talkers stay the same, but every once in a while you'll get something unusual because there's an experiment happening or a new data push happening. So this is a way to kind of view a longer term use of the network in an interesting way. And we're taking other suggestions for when people are playing with this data. How would you like to play with this data? Right now, we're trying to answer questions asked by network engineers and network owners. We let you see the higher level pattern and a time frame so you can drill down to have more detail. Okay. If you are interested in playing with this, you can go to all.netsage.global or any of the other pages I listed. You can get in touch with me if you're interested in deploying this. Get in touch with me as well. So with that, that is the end of my prepared remarks. I don't know if there are any questions or comments. Looks like there are some in the chat.
Yeah, there was some back and forth in there. So first, thank you, Jen, for going over that. I think what we'll do is if anybody does have any specific questions or things that they would like to see, maybe for their networks, hint, hint, we can certainly do that. As I look at sort of the attendees here that represent sort of national and even some international networks, is anybody out there looking at this as being potentially useful as a deployment strategy for their networks? So if so, certainly type so into the chat, and I'll just sort of pause right there and we'll see if anybody bites on that.
I should say one of the fascinating things about this project, and Jason has been sitting next to me when I've been preparing various versions of a talk like this, is every time we look at the data, we find something else different or weird or unusual. Even when we're not looking for something unusual, we'll often come up with something and say, huh, I wonder what's going on there. Or, I wonder if they know that they're only getting that kind of performance. One of the things my group is doing, since we can't travel anymore and we're all used to traveling, and using the travel to meet with our partners, is we're doing targeted lookups for science areas. We started naturally with COVID-related databases that we could find in an NSF database, who's gotten funded recently for COVID work. Because a lot of these databases got set up in ways that the IT staff didn't know about it. So they put up some data on their lab computer, which is now being used all over the world. Surprise. So we've been finding those and working on improving the performance for various sites, which has been a lot of fun. All right. Looks like the only chat is James, who would love to see more people use the Science Registry. And that's true. I mean, this is one of the things, it's crowdsourced. There's no way that NetSage can do this by ourselves. James has been a huge backer for this. He's given me a lot of data that we'll be pulling in shortly.
Yeah, so in the absence of anybody with a burning question, I'll ask a couple that I've at least jotted down here. And, you know, along the lines of what you were alluding to, Jed, you know, what's an interesting pattern that either the IU International engineers or some of our Epic engineers have been tracking in the past couple of weeks, you know, whether it be long and crummy performance or, you know, very, very good performance, but maybe bursty, you know, any examples that you can show or just ways that we've walked through the problems in the past?
So we've been working with the University of California, Santa Cruz on some other problems entirely, and happened to notice that they had very regular large data transfers to partners of ours in Singapore. But they were weirdly sporadic. It turns out most of the time that data was getting routed over a network where we didn't have monitoring. But when that network went down and that particular cable is very unreliable, it would come onto our network so we would see it, then it would go away and it would come back. But these data transfers, it turns out that in Singapore, the A-Star group runs a biology mirroring site, which is used by researchers all over Asia. And this was actually pre-COVID. We found that these transfers were coming in and the performance was awful. So we've been working with them to try to improve that and to figure out what was going on with the routing, because also the routing was very strangely asymmetric. We find a lot of asymmetric routes or traffic going through places that it just shouldn't go through, primarily in the international space, but sometimes domestically as well. Domestically, just in the last couple weeks, one of my guys was playing with the TAC dashboard to make sure the various pieces were connecting properly. And we found a 7-day transfer between TAC and Texas A&M. Turns out that our contact at TAC wasn't aware of this, and he's now working with that group to try to get them better performance, because what they were trying to do should not have taken 7 days. So that's kind of cool. You know, it's always nice to have something you can point to where you've actually helped someone move their data faster, because we're doing networks, not because we want giant networks, although of course most people do, but we're doing it to help the science. And if people can move their data faster, they can get the science faster and they complain less to us.
Okay.
So is that...
And Eric was asking about how does the science registry mesh with the HEP push for network packet marking? So I'm only peripherally involved with the packet marking effort, but Jen, if you have anything to say about if there is any mesh that's going on right now.
There hasn't been mesh on that to date, in part because, as I understood it, the packet marking was just starting. It's certainly something that we could take advantage of going forward. Right now, what we've done for a lot of our HEP resources, because they are such a large and vocal group, as we're all aware of, we've been able to work with them to identify endpoints so that we can map them more clearly. And in the updated project push, you'll see Atlas and CMS much more broadly represented. So.
Okay, and we have another question. Keeping an eye on complex graphs may not be very practical. Are you able to set up triggers on potential problem spots?
Right now, we don't have an alerting system tied into NetSage, but it is certainly something that we've looked at and thought about. Most of the time, this tool is used separately from an operational up-down knock, because the kinds of patterns that we see, while we do see outages, as we noticed with the shift of traffic for that GPN Oklahoma link, it's not meant to be the 24/7, you rely on it to tell you that a network is down kind of system. It's meant for large data transfers. We throw out all of the small data. We don't even collect it. It gets passed through the pipeline. But that said, we've been looking at ways to do alerts with time bounds. So if you could come up with an estimate of what behavior do you expect if you were out of that time bound, could you send someone an email saying, hey, something weird is going on here, you might want to look at it? Or have a page set up where these got highlighted. Coming up with those time bounds is extremely difficult. Even using modern AI techniques, we haven't found a good algorithmic approach for that, but it's something that we're actively looking at for the next year. Anything else? Ken asks, is there any sort of best guess port range definitions like Globus is this range to identify data transfer applications? The best tool that I know for this is to contact Jason Zarowski in Slack and say, hey, what have you seen, in this range? I actually have a cheat sheet where we kind of went through and identified some of the more common ranges. I'm not a network engineer by training, so this is new to me. Part of the challenge with that, Ken, and while I think it would be really helpful, these ranges change and people can specify non-standard ranges if they want to. So it's hard. We can certainly publish this is, I'm happy to make my cheat sheet available to other folks if they're interested. It covers maybe 75% of the cases I've seen.
And I think that was a piece of feedback, at least the last time that I was in the focus group that was helping NetSage with GUI design, was even if you hovered over your port map diagram and it says 22, maybe there needs to be a suggestion that says possibly SSH, because 9 times out of 10, that's probably what it is. For the Globus ports, yeah, most people run them on the defaults unless you don't, and then you're just kind of poking and hoping. So I think that would be a good addition if there was just some indication. It doesn't even need to be a displayed indication, but if there was some way to have it kind of guess for you, because most people who look at it, if they're pressed for time, they're going to want to know, hey, what's this application? Because then that'll help them with the engagement process after the fact.
And I think when we do this everything board, that might also be something that we could try to add in. So.
Okay, so I'll put out the call again. Oh, Ken has yet another question. Is there any sort of CC star suggestion to register CC star awarded CI, Science, DMZ, DTNs into the Science Registry?
It's not written into the solicitation, but we're happy to work with anyone who has or hasn't gotten CC star funding to work with this and to try to figure out how to do this a little bit easier. We've had various suggestions for Kevin, how he could improve the CC star solicitation to make it a little bit more pragmatic and a little bit more useful to the broader community. Sometimes he includes it, sometimes he doesn't. But you're welcome to bring it up with him too, Ken.
All right, so I'll put out a last call here if anybody has any other questions that they'd like to ask. And then maybe, Jen, if you just want to share any more links that people can go and look at to see a little bit more about this, or your email address if they want to contact you about deployment.
This is probably the best place to start. So let me, come on. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the comments and the suggestions, and look forward to working with anybody who's interested in trying this out.
All right. Well, thank you, Jen, and thanks everybody for attending. Next week's talk is going to be from Ed Cologne, and he's going to be talking about perf sonar on mobile devices, I believe. We'll send out an announcement about that. Hope everybody has a good weekend, and we'll talk to everybody soon.
Thank you.